I turned a pile of scrap strips into my own pattern paper and ended up making multiple cards from one sheet. Welcome back to my Use Your Stash Paper Scraps edition. This is challenge 5, and for today I actually went back to an old tutorial by Christina Werner for some inspiration in using patterned papers, especially those with lots of multiple colours can feel a little bit intimidating for me. I didn't have anything in my stash that looked quite like that, so I used scrap pieces instead to build a panel inspired by the pattern that she'd been using. And I loved it so much that I thought if I created a full card front sheet and used a technique like this where I was cutting pieces out and I was mindful of the size of those pieces, I'd be able to have enough patterns to feature on several projects. And that's exactly what I did. In my collection, I've got a bunch of multi-purpose adhesive sheets. I'd actually never opened the pack before and used them, and that feels a little silly now because this was super fun to do. I'm going to cut one of these sheets to the size of a card front. In my original take on this technique, I cut the pieces to 1 centimetre wide and just glued them down. But in working with a full card front size, not all of my pieces are a full card front size, and I wanted to have flexibility with the patterns that I used. And so I found a fun tip was to cut them to 0.5 of a centimetre, half a centimetre, and layer them on patchwork style. Making them nice and small like that, very skinny, meant that the finished panel didn't look too choppy. It looked like it was designed to be that way. So I loved that. All right, so I've got my adhesive sheet and I've got all of my little pieces. Now I need something to stick it down to. This was actually the back of an old Christmas card that never made it out that season, and I'm just going to repurpose that. It's not going to matter that it's stamped on. So I'm taking this side off and I'm going to stick it down to so now I'm going to peel back the other side of that sticky sheet. I'm just going to make sure that that's adhered on nicely, and I've got this corner here, pulling that back, and that is leaving its stickiness here on this old piece of card for us to put our strips down on. So as I'm putting my strips down, I'll bring you down a little closer. I need to use the edge of my card, but also the guides. And I'm starting on the left, bringing it across to the right, and there is a little wiggle room before pressing that down properly. These pink strips, I was fortunate. They came from a bit of scrap that was the right size for a card front. these little striped pieces of DSP that are next didn't. So I'm going to show you a little trick to that. As I'm working, I'm just going to keep an eye on my grid here. These are going to make about 1 centimetre each. I just want to make sure they line up. Not all of these pieces we're going to have been cut perfectly. And I don't want it all slanting and sloping one way or the other. I want to try and keep it relatively straight, so we can make little adjustments for that. Now you can see that these little pink strips didn't quite make the full run like the melon mumbo before it. So I'm being mindful not to line my cuts up. I don't want this one directly under the one before because I don't want those lines to be really obvious. I want them blended in. So what I found was, and I like this little trick with these patterned stripes, is to move the stripe off a little bit too. This bit here at the end is a dark piece, so I want to cut this so that this end being the lighter one will blend in a little better, see? All right, so I'm going to peel that next bit back and we're going to go with Calypso Coral. Wherever I didn't have a patterned paper in my stash that I could draw on, I reached for some cardstock offcuts to blend in. Swatching my lines again. All right. This was a piece of patterned paper. Again, I want to make sure that I'm not putting down those the exact size in the exact place. I'm blending it up a little. I had some adhesive on my hands, unfortunately. I've got to do my little eraser trick again and get those off. So you can see here I'm starting to run into a little bit of unevenness through the middle. This one must have been, it takes 1 millimeter and it's going to knock it out a little bit. And I'm going to counter that by just putting this up over that edge slightly. I've just given that a little press and wiggle. I'm watching my grid just to see how this sits just above that line there. So I'm just making sure that that continues across properly. I just noticed I already had spots here, so I'm going to go with the little text side for these little Marina Mist ones. And this piece was tiny. So I'm just watching my grid lines again, trying to make sure as I go across I don't go too far off course. These ones came from a circle shape, so I have to just make sure my edges are straight. And you'll notice here as I was trimming, I had a little trouble as the pieces got smaller and smaller to keep them straight in my paper trimmer. If I'd had a guillotine, I think that would have worked a lot better, but I don't. So what I'm going to need to do is adjust for that now and just lift this one a touch higher to cover that gap. So that's the full sheet there. I'm just going to trim it up and then it's ready to use. How fun is that? This piece didn't come all the way down to the bottom, so I'll trim that little section as well. So when it came time to play with my patterned paper panel, I decided to grab some inspiration from some current card making challenges. Freshly Made Sketches had one that used a bordering piece. So I cut a border using my rectangle stitched framelits, and that left me with this project here. I layered it onto some Island Indigo. I paired it with a little piece of ombre Bermuda DSP that I had in my collection, and all of these colors together seemed to work perfectly with a rainbow, and their sketch had an arch shape here, so it just all felt like it really tied in and worked so well together. So that was the first piece. For the second piece, there was a sketch challenge again at TGIF Challenges, and they had a panel like this. So I cut this rectangle and was left with this inner panel, and that looked like this here. And I wasn't sure how to decorate it. Stamped images didn't seem like the right fit. The sketch had a large floral running down the middle, and I reached for a die because I'd felt like the boldness that you could get through a die cut image worked so well here with all of those bold papers that it would work again. So these are the Flourish Thinlits, and I cut it twice, once in one of the lighter tones and the second I pushed the outline out and glued that over the top to create these two-toned flowers. It's a lot brighter than I usually work with, but I actually think it's come together really well. So if you can imagine, that left me then with just this little rectangle. Now, taking away the other vibrant colors that sat top and bottom, the piece that was actually left behind had a lovely softness to it, and that worked really well with the Sunday stamp not sketch challenge. They had a color challenge that focused on spring, and it had some of these lovely tones, the peaches, the neutrals, the blues, and they also had this beautiful image of a flower, and I pulled that in using my new Gallery Blooms stamp set. And so I made that one. So I've got 3 different cards, all created with the same paper. And they all have such a different feel. So that's it for this challenge. I'm really excited about the potential for this technique, and I hope that you give it a chance to play along at home. I think it's going to make some really unique and creative projects. And it was such a great reminder that you don't need to have the perfect patterned paper. You can create something from scraps that you already own. So if you give this a try, I'd really love to hear how it turns out for you. This is part of my Use Your Stash series, so there's some more scrap-based ideas coming. If you enjoyed this one, don't forget to like and subscribe so that you don't miss the next challenge. Next week, I'm taking scraps in a completely different direction again, so I look forward to seeing you then.